Fans, welcome to Liberty Blue, the essential New York Rangers podcast. I'm Andrew Chunley alongside Nick Zararis. And Nick, we are halfway there. Game one of the Eastern Conference Finals. The New York Rangers and the Florida Panthers officially puck drop around 8 p.m. on Wednesday. It'll be like 8:15 probably because it's national TV. But we are here. This is the halfway point of the playoffs. It feels like we've been through a million battles so far. We're only halfway there.
That's the thing about the hockey playoffs, man. I mean, it's true of the basketball playoffs as well, but the hockey playoffs are so physically demanding and mentally taxing, especially the burden, the uniqueness of having sudden death overtime in your sport, where those games can feel like 2 or 3 games in a single night, even if it only goes a few minutes into that first overtime period. But you're in the Final Four, and we said coming into the playoffs, the expectation was to at least make the conference final. Now, that's not to say anyone is satisfied or that this was the end goal, but based on the way hockey playoffs are, where the better team doesn't often win, I was reading something earlier today that if the Canucks were to win tonight, it'd be the first time in 20-something years where the four division winners were actually the final four teams. So it's unlikely you're going to get this outcome, but the Rangers have had some things break their way, fortunately, where they've gotten some more favorable draws. They've been able to take advantage of situations within individual games to make some things happen for themselves, and they're here. That alone is something to feel reasonably good about. Sure, you want to win this series. Florida's a good team. I know a lot of people are confused as to why Florida is the betting favorite and why the statistical models favor them. The models aren't, I would say the actual gap between these teams is a lot closer to the betting markets, where it's about plus 120 Rangers, which would be about an implied 55-45-ish in terms of split, whereas some of the models a little more aggressive, 60-40, 65-35. This is a close series. Florida's a more talented team. The Rangers had a better regular season. The Rangers have had a slightly easier path so far in the playoffs. They've played one fewer game. This should be awesome hockey. This will absolutely aid you a lot in the next 2 weeks, but this should be really good hockey. These are definitely two of the five best teams in the entire league. I'm glad the Rangers got here. If their regular season had ended before this, it would have felt like a disappointment based on the regular season they had.
100%. This is where if the Rangers fell apart against Washington, that would have been a disaster. If they fell apart against Carolina, it would have been a disaster only because they had a 3-0 lead off the rip to get reverse swept. That would have been a disaster. But they're here. At this point, if they lose to Florida, obviously it's a disappointment. If we talked about it all year, if not now, then when? This is the best chance they have, the best road. This is the path that is alight the most. You never know what's going to happen next year, how the puck is going to, if the pucks are going to bounce your way, if injuries are going to go your way. There's so many unknowns in a year to year with, the season is a long time. 82 games is over the stretch of what, 7 months, 6 months is a long time. And to get to this point, a lot of things have to go your way, and you can't replicate that on a year-to-year basis. I mentioned this earlier before. I'll say it again. I work at SiriusXM NBA Radio, and one of the hosts on the channel is Antonio Daniels. Won the NBA championship with the Spurs in '99, second year in the league. And his thought, as a young player in the league, his thought process was, we're a really good team. We'll get there. We'll get back there. Guess what? I never won again. This is year in and year out is a completely different set of rules that you have to abide by in order to get to this point. So by all accounts, it's a successful season now that they got to the ECF. But the job's not done because, again, this is the best team, statistically at least, the Rangers have ever seen. They've broken their win record. They've broken their point record. By all accounts, the best team in the league throughout the course of the regular season. Okay. Well, then let's see how you do against a really good Florida team.
Building off of that, and I said this as soon as Florida won on Friday night, the Rangers have consistently been a good team. The last 2 times we've seen them get to this point, the Eastern Conference Finals, they've run up into a great team. That 2015 Tampa Bay team, that was planting the seeds of the eventual Tampa Bay dynasty. They don't eventually become the team they do if they don't have those playoff runs there. That series, a lot of Ranger fans can still mentally picture Game 5, Game 7 of that series where There just wasn't a lot going on offensively. And as the series wore along, there just wasn't a whole lot of room. 2022, same exact deal. The Rangers only scored like 9 goals in 6 games, which sounds insane, but the Rangers had a really hard time scoring in that series. And this Florida team profiles very similar to that Tampa Bay team in terms of how their talent is distributed throughout their lineup, the skill positions that they have, the individual talents who are really good at what they do. And you have to level up. You are in the Final Four. Good is not good enough this time of year. You can be a really good team. We're going to see a really good team win tonight between Edmonton and Vancouver, and they're going to go up against Dallas. And if you show up to play Dallas as a good team, Dallas is going to beat you in 5 or 6 games. Dallas is that much better. Now, that's not to say that Florida is all that much better than the Rangers, but I think if you go person by person, they have a slight talent advantage. Now, advantage does not mean guaranteed. Guys can underperform, or in the Rangers case, guys can overperform. Coming into the playoffs, I don't think most people would have assumed Vincent Trocheck would be leading the team in points going into the Eastern Conference Finals. Guys can rise to the occasion and make some things happen. The Rangers getting this layoff when they did is helpful.
Yep.
It does seem like Filipino is going to have a good shot to play on Wednesday. Adam Fox getting any additional rest he can, sorely needed. Those 2 things alone, the rest has been very beneficial. This Florida team's a different beast. I have long felt that Florida was the best team in the East all regular season. If you go back and watch any of the power ranking shows I did for Locked On, I consistently had Florida first or second in the East, alternating with the Rangers. Florida's got, I think, a little bit of a higher ceiling than the Rangers just because their style of play is a little bit more conducive to playoff success. And their guys are just a smidge better. Barkov is probably the best forward on either team in this series. Kachuk is probably the 3rd or 4th best player in this entire series. So this is the first time since 2022 where the Rangers are at this point, and they're going to go up against a team whose stars are better. This has historically been the issue for the Rangers when they get to a conference finals or a cup final. That it's not that their guys aren't good. It's that the guys on the other team are future Hall of Famers. 20 with the Lightning, Kucherov, Stamkos, Hedman, Vasilevsky, that's 4 guaranteed future Hall of Famers. This Florida team, Barkov more likely than not is going to be a Hall of Famer someday. Bob's one of a handful of goalies to win 2 Vezinas. He's going to have a pretty good shot as the best Russian goalie of all time to eventually get in. And Kachuk's still very early on in his career, but if he maintains the consistent 100-point trajectory he's on, he's going to have an outside chance as well. This is going to be a real test, but the Rangers are perfectly capable of winning this series. It's not that they can't, it's that it's going to be difficult.
One of the things that I wanted to highlight, because you mentioned Bobrovsky, is while he hasn't been bad by any stretch of the imagination,
not as good as last year.
He went on the pace of a lifetime last season. So obviously replicating it is going to be next to impossible. We've seen it throughout the course of these playoffs so far. Bobrovsky hasn't been bad, but he hasn't been, otherworldly every single time he's had to face a shot. So by all accounts, the thought process is, okay, even if the Panthers have maybe more depth, maybe more scoring threats at every moment, I think the goalie situation I don't want to say heavily favors the Rangers, but Shesterkin should be outplaying Bobrovsky. Given how these playoffs have gone to this point, given how Shesterkin has played and Bobrovsky has played, and you take a look at their career history as well, it would be surprising to me if Bobrovsky suddenly remembered how to play as well as he did last season, and also for Shesterkin to not play as well as we've seen him play. It's going to be like the goalie matchup is going to be a big part of this, and Barkov is incredible. Kachuk is incredible. Ekblad and also Gustav Forsling, one of the most underappreciated defensemen in the entire league.
Verhaeghe, Reinhardt, 50 goals. Yep. It's a good group, man.
It's a really good team. But again, we go back to this idea of if not now, then when. And I think this team knows that. I think they are aware of the circumstance that they're in, the situation that they're in, and yeah, I mean, of course, every team that's still here wants to win this. Like that's I'm not breaking any news here, but I think the Rangers understand that hey, the Florida Panthers have a lot of talent on that team, but all they need to do, and the Athletic that put out that graphic of the Panthers having a 65% chance of the series, whatever. If you read the article, they go into all the specifics about it. And at the end of the day, in the article, they highlighted pretty well of like, if it gets to a 1-goal game, the Rangers know how to essentially dominate those, and all you have to do is just score one more goal than the other team to win the game. And the Rangers, throughout the entire season, and they also highlighted that Laviolette's team in 06 was exactly good at exactly the same thing. You get to a 1-goal game, Laviolette's teams know how to essentially control and win the game. If the Rangers can hold the Panthers' offense, they have a really good shot.
So let me build off of that. Bob was the best goalie in the playoffs last year, statistically, the underlying numbers. This year, depending on which model you look at, he's somewhere between 5th and 8th. Shesterkin is somewhere between 3rd and 6th. So same tier of goaltending performance so far in the postseason in terms of goals saved above expected. The big difference between this year and last year is that the Panthers have played a lot better in front of Bob, so he hasn't needed to be all-world. I'm not saying that he can't be all-world, but he hasn't needed to be so far. That has helped them a lot. The fact that they've played, and this is going to sound a little stupid to say about a team who had the best power play in the NHL in the first round and a Bruins team that was like 6th or 7th in goals scored. They haven't exactly played all-world offenses. So there's probably a little bit of room there for some regression defensively, for them to be a little worse, for Bob to have to do a little bit more work. So that's an inflection point for me. I definitely think that's one of the areas in this series where the Rangers do have an advantage is in net. Shesterkin is in his physical prime. Bob is on the backswing. You know, he's still an upper-tier goaltender. He was a Vezina finalist this year. He was great in the playoffs last year. He's perfectly capable of rising to the occasion, but he's also volatile. He is prone to the 5 or 6 goals against. You know, the Bruins, who aren't exactly an all-world offense, did pot 5 past him 2 separate times in the last round. So if the game gets away from him, and we've seen the Rangers do this in these playoffs where they score 3 on you in a heartbeat, that's an area where you can exploit Bobrovsky. Next up, another thing I wanted to talk about. I think the biggest talent disparity in this series is defense, and I think that's solely because Adam Fox is not 100%. If Adam Fox were 100%, I would be inclined to say this is close to a push. But Forsling is the best defensive defenseman out of the 12 guys on both teams.
Sure.
Ekblad, at the state he is at, he can be 70% of what Adam Fox is. Then you go down to that second pair. Can K'Andre Miller outplay Brandon Montour? That's a tall order. Montour is one of the best offensive defensemen in the entire NHL. Nico Mikkola is better defensively than Jacob Trouba is if Trouba is going to be on that second pair. You get down to that third pair. Is Schneider and Gustafsson going to be an adventure again? Or is Florida's third pair with Oliver Ekman-Larsson going to do what you want from your sheltered third pair? If they get Adam Fox right, I'm a lot more inclined to say this is pretty much a push. But if he's still, 70, 80% of himself like he was in most of that Carolina series, I do think this is an issue for the Rangers in that they already struggle to generate offense in terms of just chances and dangerous chances. But against a strong defensive team in front of a quality goaltender, I think that's something that's very reminiscent of what happened in 2022, where that Tampa team played really good defense and Vasilevsky was pretty close to lights out after the first 2 games. That's the thing that really concerns me, because forwards, and we're going to talk about the forwards after this, but it's close enough. I'm not ready to say Florida is leaps and bounds better than the Rangers up front. I would say 5-10% better, but the biggest gap for me is on defense. And I think the results bear that out. If you go look at all of Florida's underlying numbers, they don't have to play a lot of defense because their forward group is so good. And when they do play defense, they don't concede a lot. 5th in expected goals against, 2nd in actual goals against. I think that tells you a really detailed story of a team that just kind of has, I don't want to say got the secret sauce, but has kind of figured out the key to today's league. Play as little defense as possible, and when you do have to play defense, be big, be physical, knock guys off of pucks, and transition to offense quickly. I think that's why OEL has worked so well for them on that third pair. Is his only job is to get the puck up. That's all he has to do, and he's done a really good job of that this year.
I think the one positive I want to say about Fox right now specifically is because he's had a few days off to literally do nothing. Like, my man's has been sitting up on the couch, watching hockey, watching whatever he wants, and just taking a breather because his knee, I'm sure, is still not at 100%. Thank you, Nick Jensen, for that. but he's back skating. I think he skated today.
Yeah, he did. Lindgren was out, but he was
Yeah,
skating with Jones. Yeah,
sure.
Jones was the fill-in.
That kind of gives me a little bit more hope that he's not going to be 100%, and everybody that plays in the playoffs will tell you that nobody, that quote unquote nobody's at 100% this time of year. But I think if it was a more serious issue, I think they would have given Fox an extra day, maybe until tomorrow or maybe until Wednesday morning to get back into it. But because he's skating today and Heedle's skating today, and he's not just a placeholder, like he's put firmly on that third line, which makes me think he's going to be playing on Wednesday as well. That makes me a little bit hopeful that, yeah, I mean, is he going to be the Norris winning 100% healthy Adam Fox that we've seen? Probably not, but he's, I would think, a little bit closer to that than he was during the Carolina series based off of the early time frame that he's skating. But everything else, yeah, the Panthers blue line, I'm not too worried about after Forsling Ekblad. Even the Mikkola pairing, the thing about those guys is, again, is like as long as you get it into their half of the ice, it's exploitable. You could say the same thing about the Rangers defense for sure, and we've talked about it a lot during the Carolina series. But that's the thing about that blue line is, yeah, they're really good at pushing tempo and making sure that the puck doesn't cross the red line. But if you could get it there, there's a lot of holes in that defense. You can make fun of OEL's defense because he doesn't really play it. Like you can exploit Mikkola, and a lot of the Rangers players know how to exploit Mikkola because they were teammates last year. Like there's a little bit of that kind of aspect going on. Is it a lot? Is it going to be 75% of the game plan? Of course not. But these little things add up, and at the end of the day, it's all about what the Athletic said. If the Rangers can just score one more goal than Florida every game, then none of it really matters, and the Rangers got to win the series.
That's the key, isn't it? We talked about that from a Washington perspective in the first round of how do you, as the team that doesn't generate as much offense, how do you prolong a series? And that's the key. Like we talked about last series against Carolina, and I've said this regardless of what series talking about from an underdog perspective, you're going to need the overtime games to go your way. And unfortunately, this team, Florida, over the last 2 years has arguably been the best team in the entire league when it comes to overtime.
But all that means now is that regression's going to hit.
You could say the same thing about the Rangers, who are 2-0 in overtime this year in the playoffs so far. So that's a really interesting point to make as far as where teams might be able to regress. Is both of these teams have had success in overtime these playoffs so far. I think the one last thing I want to throw in there on the defense before we move over talking about forwards and then opening it up a little bit more. Montour, the reason I'm a little bit more inclined to trust Montour than I am, say, Miller, is that he's got to drag Trouba around. I think Mikkola understands his limitations as a skater a little bit better than Trouba does. God bless him, but Trouba still thinks he's playing in 2018 where he's one of the bright young defensemen in the league and skates really well. 5 or 6 years ago, Jacob Trouba did skate really well. Everybody else has just gotten a lot faster in that time. The average NHL player is down like 2 or 3 pounds in the last 5 years, and the average skater speed is only going up. So it's not that Trouba's like irrevocably brokenly slow because of all these injuries. It's just everybody else has gotten faster. So I do think that's an area of concern here. And then one last thing before throwing it over, and I know I just said one last thing. If the Rangers are going to win this series, it's largely going to be due to Shesterkin because I do not have the faith in this defense to be able to break against this Florida forecheck. Carolina, for all of the jokes we like to make about Carolina, they did live in the Rangers half, basically the entirety of games 4, 5, and 6. They had the puck a lot. The danger with that is Florida's got a lot more than just 2-3 guys who can put the puck in the net. That's the thing. Verhaeghe's got the 4th most goals of anybody in the playoffs over the last 2 years. Like, he's got more goals than McDavid over the last 2 years. Reinhart, not as good in the regular season, but he did have 50 in the regular season. Tkachuk and Barkov, spoken for. Sam Bennett, miserable prick, very well spoken for based on how that series against Boston went. I do think the forwards, speaking of the forwards, I think the biggest question mark I have for the Rangers, how are they going to adapt to the games in Florida when Florida's going to have Lash changed and Panarin's going to have Barkov? Because that's what this series, I think, as in terms of forward play, is going to come down to is how well can the Rangers avoid their one consistent 5-on-5 line against Barkov? Because you saw it in the Carolina series. The 2 games where they couldn't get Trocheck, Panarin, Lafreniere going, they had nothing offensively. They scored 1 goal in both of those games and just they really didn't have anything. If Barkov can do that, and he blocked a shot in the game on Friday, may or may not have a lingering hand thing. If they can survive, if they can get a second line going to complement that line, then I think we're basically at a coin flip. If they can't get a second line going, I think the 55-45 is an apt line to say how I expect this series to go.
I think the Rangers offense, outside of that top line that can generate essentially whenever they want, I think they're going to have a little bit more space to operate with, because Carolina's system essentially played in such a way that suffocated everybody, and they just played a game of hot potato. It's like, okay, well, we're going to take the puck away from you because you can't handle it, and we're just going to skate around for a minute and a half throwing pad shots at Shesterkin, hoping one of them goes in. I think Florida plays a little bit of a different style where they are almost as imposing on the forecheck, but they don't play that kind of, we're going to just cycle the puck around for 17 minutes out of the period because that's what we like to do. We're just not going to let you have it. Their style is a little bit more offense driven, and because of that, I do see some more opportunities coming from the third line, or maybe Wenberg gets a break because he's got a lot of speed. Maybe Hedl sets somebody up, or I think there's going to be a little bit more of a window of opportunity for not the Rangers' first line to contribute at 5-on-5. We saw Kreider, essentially have a legacy third period. I mean, I still can't believe that happened. My jaw is still on the floor and I cannot pick it back up. Like, that was awesome. That period was awesome from Chris Kreider. You can't expect him to do that every game. Obviously, that's not going to happen. I would like to see more guys stepping up here, and I do think that because Florida plays a little bit of a different style, they're going to have a little bit more opportunity to create for themselves and not have to rely on 3 guys to essentially provide the bulk of their 5-on-5 offense.
My pushback on that would be, if you go and look at the profiles of their styles, Florida plays at one of the fastest tempos in the entire league. In just terms of raw scoring chances and the expected goals and the high danger, they have the puck an awful lot. And that does benefit the Rangers in some respects, because we know the Rangers like to counter. They like to create off the rush. The one issue with that, Florida is very good off of the rush, and that is something the Rangers have really struggled with this season. That's been a recurring theme all year. Their defensemen, because they play so high, they are prone to getting blown past. And again, that was something you saw in the Carolina series. When Carolina was going, and it wasn't exactly their best players. Kuznetsov's 2 goals in that series, 3 goals, all off of rushes, off of turnovers. Florida's got better guys than Evgeny Kuznetsov, where if you give him chances, they're going to be able to pot them. One thing I do think I'm very curious to see how they handle is what they're going to do with that spot, that 12th forward spot, essentially, because if Hedl can play in game 1, are we just going to assume he's good for game number 2? If not, where do you go with from there? I don't think you're going to see Rempe at all in Florida. No. I think you might see him in New York for game 1 or 2, maybe, if Hedl cannot play. I think if Hedl is healthy to play, you will not see Rempe, you will not see Brodzinski, unless there's an injury. If there's an injury, you might see one of those. Same thing with Blake Wheeler. I know that was a topic of conversation today. I think Blake Wheeler is only emergency if they really need a body. If 2 or 3 guys get injured in the course of this series, I think that's the only way you see Blake Wheeler. I think Rempe probably, like I just said, you're probably not seeing him unless it's in New York and it's game 1 or 2. But if Hedl's good to go, I don't think there's an argument for playing Rempe. If Rempe's not, if Hedl's not healthy, then I think you could have the debate of whether you'd rather Brodzinski or Rempe. I'm sure the national media is going to ask Matthew Tkachuk about it at some point during one of these games.
Of course they are, and they don't have any other storylines to go off of. But yeah, like you can't play Matt Rempe. We talked about this before, where if you are, regardless of whether or not it's his fault, and some of it is, but a lot of it isn't, If every time you're out there on the ice, the referees are essentially staring at you, waiting for you to do anything for them to call a penalty on you, then you can't justify having him on the ice. That's why whenever he does play, he gets like 6 minutes a game. He's the Stu Bickle of the 2024 Rangers. But Stu Bickle wasn't on the ice because he genuinely was not good at playing hockey. Matt Rempe's not on the ice because he can't be trusted because the referees just always want to call a penalty on him, which let's say 75% is not his fault, 25% is. Even if you want to play that game, it's still not worth putting him out there. But even then, let's say you have to do that. Like, let's say you have to put somebody out there in case Sam Bennett wants to do something again, like he did against Boston. But even then, what is he going to do against Sam Bennett? He's going to be on the bench anyway. It's like that's the funny part about all this is like, oh yeah, Matt Rempe is the deterrent. Nobody wants to touch him when he's out there on the ice. He's not on the ice, dude. He gets 5 minutes of ice time a game. He sits there and he's like laughing on the bench because he's a goofy goober. Like who is he scared?
Oh, there's nothing going on. That is the epitome of lights on and nobody's home. He's sitting on the bench, bopping his head back and forth, listening to the music during stoppages.
He's having a great time.
There's nothing going on up there. There's a reason he goes everywhere with headphones around his neck like an iPad kid.
I mean, he's happy to be there. He's having a great time, and I can't blame him. Like that's he's out there living his dream. He's just having a ball. Yes. That's all it is. He's having a great time. But the ideal, because Heedle's already practicing with the top guys, because he's already slotted in the third line, I don't know what the illness was that took him out for a week. That was really never explained beyond soreness/sickness. Usually those things don't last over a week. I don't really know what
the comparison I would give you, Andrew, is if you had done no marathon training and then ran a marathon. That's the comparison I would give you. You would probably be feeling like shit for at least a few days if you tried to run a marathon cold. And I know Hedl had practiced for a while and had been working out. But that first time you get back in there, it's the exact same type of physically demanding energy. So it's good to see he's close, assuming we'll see him at some point. It just gives you another card to play. It deepens your lineup. It forces a guy further down. In an ideal world, if Will Cooley's on your fourth line, you got a good team.
Yeah, you do.
Just being objective, being reasonable. If you have the luxury of playing a Will Cooley on your fourth line with Vesey and Gaudreau, that's a really good fourth line. It really has, and it has the opportunity to do a little bit more than most fourth lines, where even if they don't generate chances, if they just hold the puck in the Florida zone for 35 to 45 seconds and buy your defenseman a little bit of time to breathe, that's all you need from your fourth line at this point in the season. They contribute a goal, that's gravy. Zone control and slow it and bringing the temperature of the game down. That's your key to your fourth line. One thing I've really found interesting is how quickly everybody's opinions about Paul Maurice changed in 2 years. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to give Andrew Brunette all of the credit for Florida kind of emerging as this team. But I think the fact that Andrew Brunette went to the Devils, they were great. And then he left and the Devils were mediocre. And then he went to Nashville and Nashville was significantly better. I think the Andrew Brunette molding experience should be getting more recognition here. Because objectively, we all know what happened in Winnipeg 2 years ago. We all know. He looked around the room, said, I can't fix this, and quit. Objectively, he realized that nobody was saving them. I do think that will be a storyline at some point in this series. If Blake Wheeler gets in a game, that's all that's going to be talked about. That the coach of the other team is the one who stripped him of the captaincy. I think that's all you're going to hear.
And you know what the funny part about this is? He's going to score a goal in that game. I promise you.
Oh, yeah. He'll get one shift in this series, get hurt on that shift, but score a goal.
But score. The Steven Stamkos score from a few years ago.
Exactly.
My man's was on half of a leg, but somehow got into, I think it was a 2-on-1 or something like that. My man's ripped a top cheddar and then never saw the ice again. Like, come on, man. That is going to be the Blake Wheeler experience, isn't it?
I don't think there's a world where he gets in just because he was already slow before he broke his leg. And you're going to be
this. The team knows.
You would think. That's all I'm saying is you would think that would be the case. The one other thing in this series, this is the best special teams the Rangers have faced yet. Like Carolina was top 3, and I know Carolina was top 3 in both. But you watch their power play and you compare the personnel on that power play to what Florida has. And similarly to how a lot of people have been like, oh, but Carolina was the cup favorite. Carolina was the cup favorite. Gambling odds are those people's opinions. The sports books base those opinions off of their statistical models about who will get the most action. Those are not in action. Those are not a reflection of how everybody feels about things. I have felt all year Florida was better than Carolina. It's the same thing here with the special teams. Florida special teams not as good as Carolina's in the regular season, just about as good in the playoffs as what Carolina was in the playoffs. But Florida's got more guys. It really is that simple. I think a lot of this series is going to come down to which star players are able to control their minutes more. And you have no better distillation of that than special teams. And that's why the Rangers have been able to pull away in their series, both against Washington and against Carolina. Is special teams is where your stars dominate. And other than game 3 and 4, 4 and 5, where the Rangers did not score on the power play, their special teams were great. Their special teams were great in that Carolina series. And that was the difference. Florida's guys are just as good, if not better. I think there and the defense are the two inflection points for me. I think goaltending, close enough to a push. I think forwards, close enough to a push. Special teams, you lean the Rangers based on the results, but it wouldn't surprise you if Florida's guys played a little bit better than they have to this point. And then the defense, which we talked about earlier.
I think if you are, and I'm not saying you, just in general, I think if you are seriously considering opening up a sports book and betting either a sweep or a 5-game series, just give us your money because we'll spend it wisely, as opposed to gifting the sports book your money. It's not going to be a sweep. It's not going to be 5. I kind of am of the opinion it's not going to be 6 either. Like, this is going to be down to the wire, last man standing, last goal wins kind of series. Like, this is going to be such a battle between not just top talent, but in terms of overall thought processes and how to play the game. Florida's a lot tougher of a team. Matthew Tkachuk is a two-way forward, kind of a Rick Nash body build, but a type of two-way forward that actually throws the body around. He's a guy that will destroy somebody in a corner and then skate 200 feet and score a goal. Like, that's the kind of two-way forward that, you know, really highlights a forward group for a team. They play a lot heavier of a style of a game, but they do it in such a way that it doesn't impede their way to then counterattack with their speed. That's a rare team build of forwards where you have a lot of these really skilled guys that can throw the body around, that they can essentially wither away the other team while not withering away themselves, and then countering that with the speed that they have. A lot of, like, it's very hard to find players that can do both. Usually it's one or the other, but Florida has found a good formula to find players that can essentially do both and not have the either, you know, one of the two impede the other. They're a well-balanced team. They have a well-balanced attack. The Rangers have a lot of tricks up their sleeves as well. I'm sure each team has spent the last few days 16-hour video sessions with not just the assistant coaches and all that, but the video coordinators really breaking down the power play, the penalty kill, their forechecking system. A lot, like this past weekend, I'm sure they lived in the video room, and a lot of the, you know, I know the Rangers had Friday and Saturday completely off, but I'm sure Sunday was spent in the video room from a lot of the team as well, and I'm sure they spent a lot
they were at the Knick game.
Well, yeah, but that was after.
Going up all the way up to West. That's so stupid that they have their practice facility in Westchester.
It is very silly. It is very silly. But in any case, I'm sure they spent a lot of today going through what they learned in their video sessions, and, you know, going through on the ice of how to counter this, counter that. So this I think is going to go 7. Like, it is very difficult for me to see a world in which either team can knock the other off in less than that. Of course, I would like the Rangers to do it earlier. That'd be great that'd be great for my needs personally. It might not be great for my cardiologist because I'd be paying them less money to help me out. But I think this is going to be a battle to the death, essentially. Like, this is going to be mayhem, and I'm here for it.
Oh, I mean, you saw Florida's playoff run last year. They were the beneficiaries of crazy bounces. You know, they were 4-0 in overtime until they got to the Cup final. They played really well They had a handful of guys really emerge. I mean, Matthew Tkachuk was like on the cover of magazines, which I think the last hockey player to be on the cover of a non-sports magazine was Wayne Gretzky, and I'm not joking. So Florida's a team. Florida has emerged since 2020 as one of the preeminent contenders.
I always think when you say we're a team, I just think of the Pierre Dorian clip. Of
Yeah,
him just like it was a few years ago. The Senators were really bad. If you don't remember the clip, let me just paint a picture of. I think it was Sportsnet. They had two guys sitting beside Dorian before the season, and they're like, what I think it was something along the lines of, what kind of team are the Senators this year or whatever. And he has this really long pause. I'm talking like a 5 or 6, 7 second pause where he's staring into the ether and then looks around and says, "We're a team." Like that is one of the best clips of all time that has a penthouse in my head. So when you said we're a team, I just pictured Pierre Dorian. Anyways, continue.
Florida's in that tier now. They won the President's Trophy a couple years ago. They played a really tough series against Tampa in that first round. Tampa went on to win the Stanley Cup. They went to the Cup final last year. They're in that tier now. They're kind of similar to what the Sharks were last decade, what the Rangers were last decade, where they have the stars. It's simply a matter of, do they have everything around the stars right to capture the magic that you need to go all the way? Tampa Bay had a lot of things work out for them. The pandemic weirdly helped them out a lot over those 2 years, where the schedule being the way it was, continuity helped those teams a lot. Florida's a group. And I know I've had more than one person tweet at me while we've been talking, and there's a few comments in the chat about, well, everybody said Carolina was better. Everybody said, you're right. I agree with you. Everybody said Carolina. Sure. Carolina was the betting favorite going into these playoffs. No disputing that. I think Florida's high-end talent is better than Carolina's. I thought the Rangers-Carolina series was a coin flip. It really was a coin flip. I know the Rangers won in 6 games, but it took an act of God to end that series in 6 games. So if that went to a 7th game, would you have been surprised? Not really, no. And I expect this series to be 6 or 7 games. I expect it to be close. And for the Rangers to win, I expect it to be low scoring. I expect it to be close games, 3-2, 4-3. If it gets higher than that, that's not going to help the Rangers because Florida's a good defensive team with a good goalie.
Yeah.
If Florida is scoring 5 or 6 goals a game, the Rangers are probably shit out of luck just because that's how good Florida is. The Rangers absolutely can do this. There's not a doubt in my mind.
Sure.
They are capable of winning this series. I am going to pick them to win this series.
Yeah.
But this is going to be difficult. We have all looked at the Hurricanes with a twinge of skepticism basically forever. Like, people genuinely picked the Rangers to beat them in the bubble when the Rangers had 4 good players on that team. Like, God bless the veterans on that team, Kreider, Zibanejad, etc. That Rangers team in the bubble was god-awful. That Rangers team looked like they had never played organized hockey together before. They could not execute 3 consecutive passes in a row. But going into that series, a lot of people, I didn't. I picked Carolina in 4. I at least gave the Rangers 1 game. A lot of people just assumed the Rangers, because they're the Rangers, would find a way to beat Carolina because they always have. That was the case 2 years ago. That was the case this year. Florida is a different tier of team than Carolina. And I'm talking about that over a multi-year period. I'm not just talking about this specific season. Florida is great. The Rangers can get to this level. It is simply a matter of doing it. I think that's the biggest thing. It's not that I don't think they can do it. It's that I want to see them get to that next level.
Yeah.
Because that's what it takes this time of year.
Mm-hmm.
You got to keep getting better as the rounds go on, because the deeper you get into the playoffs, the more difficult it gets, and the more likely something fluky is going to happen that's going to mess you up. There probably are going to be moments of real adversity in this series. How the Rangers respond to those moments are ultimately probably going to decide how things pan out for them.
I have the Rangers in 7 as well. My heart says Rangers in 6, so my brain is going Rangers in 7. We've seen the spurts. Even in these playoffs, we've seen the spurts, the Kreider miracle aside, where the Rangers are smart defensively. They're moving the puck quickly in the offensive zone. They're generating chances, and they're being unpredictable. And especially in the early parts of the Carolina series, their power play was humming to an unprecedented degree. They were rolling. It was beautiful hockey. It was great. They have to stretch those periods out for longer. And that's for every team. You get here, you're one of the last 4 teams standing. The margin of error was already minuscule to begin with because of the playoffs. Now it's microscopically small. The more you give yourself the chance to score, the more you give yourself an opportunity to control the puck, the more you control the puck, by default, the less chance the other team has of scoring goals. That's hockey, baby, as John Forslund likes to say. Like, they have had stretches in these playoffs and throughout the regular season as well where they have played beautiful hockey. If they want to win this series, the number one way for them to achieve that is to prolong those stretches. They're not going to be perfect. There's going to be mistakes. We're going to tweet about it. We're going to be tweeting through it just like everybody else is. We're going to be frustrated watching these moments happen just like everybody else. But for the Rangers to win the series, the number one way of securing a trip to the Stanley Cup final is we've seen, here are these chunks of game times where you've played really good hockey. You want to get to the final, take those chunks, stretch them out, and you got yourself a trip.
All right, real quick before we get out of here. Who wins tonight?
My heart's saying Vancouver, but my brain is saying Edmonton.
Yeah, I think Edmonton's going to win as well. Yeah. I think Dallas is going to smoke either of them. Just Dallas is significantly deeper than both of those teams. Mm-hmm. What if Demko comes back?
Especially now that Besser, by the way, hopefully he's okay. If for those that haven't heard, Brock Besser not playing tonight, not playing, I think, for the rest of the playoffs, if I'm not mistaken, because they found a blood clot in his leg. So, I mean, forget hockey for a second. I just hope that dude's okay.
Yeah, he's had a hell of a 2 years between the back, the wrist, his dad, just about as difficult a 2 years you could have. And it's brutal because he's having the best year of his life this year. There were real conversations at last year's trade deadline of, can the Canucks give him away because of that contract? And he responded with the best year of his career. Sucks he's not going to be able to play tonight. I think the Oilers are going to win as well. I think I've long thought Dallas was the best team for most of the season. And then they added Chris Tanev, who just blocks every single shot that comes within 5 feet of the goalie. So that'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. We will be back either later in the week, depending on how games 1 and 2 go, or definitely next Monday. Until then, make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube.